So, this is part four in my continuing series on the history of evil and the origins of Satan. This began as a series on the history of creation with special emphasis on the history of evil and the evildoers, three prominent ones especially that are found in the Bible. Contrary to popular teaching that there is only one class of evil creatures, the so-called fallen angels, the Bible actually teaches no such thing. There are three distinct categories, three species, three races, you could say, of creatures that were instrumental in, first of all, birthing evil in God's creation, and then in its maturity, and finally its growth to full height or full depth or full darkness, to complete darkness in the creature called Satan. The father of evil in the Bible is an angelic being called the anointed cherub. He is the only one of the three fathers of evil who was an angel or an angelic being. Okay, the rest of them, the second one is Lucifer, who was of a race of men that predate Adam and his children, which are the modern mankind that is inhabiting the earth at present. We believe they are descended from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. But prior to that, there were worlds here. Many ages of time had passed on the earth already. There were men that had been given this earth in the beginning. They were called sons of God in the Bible. In mythology, they are sometimes called elves. Sometimes they call heavenly gods, and this is where the gods of mythology originate. But the most prominent one in the Bible is the man Lucifer, whose story we can read in Isaiah 14. So the second father of evil was Lucifer, who was a man who was not an angel. The third and the final in this unholy trinity of evil creatures is the beast called Satan. Now, Satan is neither an angel. He did not have his origin as an angel, nor was he ever a man. He has always been a beast. He is the dragon, serpentine dragon, we could say, a reptilian creature. Intelligent, yes. Devious, yes, obviously, because he's the devil, so obviously he's devious. A liar, a murderer from his very origins, yes. And since God, we are told, is not tempted with evil, and neither, he tempts he any man, that means, he doesn't make anybody evil because if God made creatures evil, he himself would have to be evil if he led them to evil, okay? Now, still, there's a paradox is that evil exists in God's creation. This is a subject that I've addressed many times in the past, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it does exist to serve God's purposes without contaminating or making God evil himself. Okay? That is the real paradox. That is the real mystery of God, how he has remained uncontaminated by evil, yet evil exists in his creation. Anna said it exists to serve his purposes. So, since he had purpose for evil to exist, he also had to purpose some evil creatures to exist, and therefore these evil creatures, the first one of them, were of the races of the angels, and that is also the order in which creation progressed. God began, first of all, by creating a place called the heaven, which is the city of God, from which he rules and reigns over all of his creation. This city was inhabited, first of all, by angelic beings. These angelic beings, or the angels, they are of various orders, okay? They are not all the same. Some are of a very high-ranking order. Amongst these are the cherubim, who are found always in the very close proximity to God himself. And the most powerful one of these, the most intelligent one, the one who was perfect in beauty, we are told in Ezekiel, is the one who is called the anointed cherub. He was the first that turned to sin and evil. He is the one who was made so powerful and so majestic that in time he began to think of himself as God. Now, in this history of Satan, what I've been comparing the story in the Bible is to the writings of an English author called J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien is a very, very famous author, and he has written, many books, but his most famous ones is a trilogy of books called The Lord of the Rings, on which some very, very major Hollywood movies have been made a few years ago, and they are very well known across the world. In these stories of Tolkien, he has one work which is called the Silmarillion, which is actually quite encyclopedic in that it is parallels the Bible a great deal because it begins with the history of creation, as does the Bible, and it tells us in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. So the story of creation is found in both these books, okay, in Tolkien's writings as well as in the Bible. Therefore, what we learn from the story in Tolkien, which is similar to the one in the Bible, at least the story of creation, that it begins with an all omnipotent God who is called Eru or Aluvatar in his story, and who is called Jehovah in the Bible. He is an omnipotent, omniscient being who creates, first of all, the races of angels. And this is also true in the Bible. Since God created the heaven first, it stands to reason that the creatures of heaven, which are the spirit beings, the angelic races, were created first of all. And then in Tolkien's story, sometime later, there's a whole history that happens, okay? Before there come this race of creatures called the elves. These elves are like men. They are flesh and blood. They are not spirit beings like the angels. And they were given the earth to dwell on. In Tolkien stories, the earth is called Arda. In the Bible, of course, is called the earth. And this is also true in the Bible. In Job 38 and in Proverbs 8, for example, we can read about these creatures called the sons of God. And these sons of God were given the earth to dwell on. In Job 38:7 is very, very clear, as a matter of fact, when God is laying the foundations of the earth. And we have these creatures already in existence called the morning stars, which are symbolic of angels. So the angelic races were already present. And also these ones called the sons of God. The sons of God are like Tolkien's elves. They are like men, yet they are not of the race of Adam. Adam was made from the earth. These creatures were not. These men were not. They were celestial because they originated in the heaven of God, not on the earth. They were the first inhabitants of the earth. They built worlds on the earth. They built civilizations. They fought wars. They destroyed the earth. A lot of history happened before Adam came. And it had to happen because evil had to become fully mature and become full darkness, as we see in Genesis 1:2, when it tells us darkness was upon the face of the deep, that darkness had to become complete darkness before God could make man. Okay? And that is another, explains why evil exists, which again, this is not the topic here. The topic is the origins of Satan. So what we have accounted for is, first of all, two of these classes of beings that God created in the beginning. One were the spirit creatures called angelic beings or angels, and then the second were these sons of God who are men, who are not men of the earth but men of the heavens. And there's stories in mythology, in myths and legends all across the world about these men coming from the skies and setting themselves up as gods on the earth. We can also read about that in Genesis 6, for example, which is always falsely taught as being that these were angels. They were not angels, they are men. That's why they were able to have relations with women, the daughters of Adam, and procreate with them, because they are genetically similar, yet there are some substantial differences between them as well. All right, so that brings us now to the third. The third type of creatures that God created in creation are the beasts. Okay, there were many types of beasts. We read about in the Bible about horses, about eagles, about lions, but a variety of beasts. Okay, these were all created by God at some point in the beginning before Satan and the dragons. So the order is the angelic races came first, then came these men, they were given the earth, and then the beasts. Okay, so these beasts also, they were not evil beasts in the beginning. They were just, beasts that God made. And we can read about these beasts that also stand right in the presence of God himself. Okay, so there is nothing that just because it's a beast, that it is not necessarily that it cannot have intelligence or it cannot have some type of function that is served for God. Yeah, they can and they do. But these beasts do not include in the beginning these reptilian races, the serpents, the dragons, these other lizards, etc. They were not there in the beginning. So they were added, or they came into existence at some point later. And the chief of these serpents, the most prominent one, is the one we call Satan, who is the head, who is the chief prince of evil in this time. So now we are going to understand, who created him, because if God didn't, and God cannot create anybody who was an evil murderer from his beginning, because then God himself would be responsible for that man's or the creature's evil. Okay, because the creature can then say to God, hey, you made me a murderer, so I mean, why am I being held accountable for what I'm doing here? Okay, no. So evil creatures, there's somebody that is evil right from his beginning, which neither of the angels nor the sons of God men were. They became evil, some of them at least, not all of them. Not all God's angels became evil. Not all of the celestial sons of God men became evil. Some of them did. Okay, but they were not created in the beginning like that. They were not murderers from the beginning. They did not sin from the beginning. In regards to the anointed cherub, it's very clearly written that, thou was perfect in thy ways from the day that thou was created till iniquity was found in thee. So, there was a period of time in which he lived in perfection without sin and evil. So evil and sin came and arose into him at a certain point after he was created. It was not in the beginning. In the case of Satan, in the case of the devil, it is said that he was a murderer from the beginning, which Jesus taught us in John 8:44. So the question is, who created this devil? And since in the Bible we don't have a direct story about his creation, so we have to piece together the history of Satan, of the dragon, of the serpent, from other sources of information that are available to us in this world by comparing it to that which we read in the Bible. And one of the best sources that I have ever found in my life is the story of creation of Tolkien in his book called the Silmarillion. Okay, in this it is told that it was this angel who was called Morgoth, who was like the anointed cherub of Ezekiel 28, a very powerful and mighty angel who first turned to evil. He first began to corrupt the creatures like the elves, who were the sons of God men, and he used to genetically manipulate them and to experiment with them and created monsters. Okay, eventually he created the dragons. So, okay, now people will say, you were just making this up or whatever. I am just telling you that I am speculating. I'm giving you my understanding of where I believe Satan came from, that he was created by this anointed cherub. Okay, he was the dragon, the race, the serpents, this whole species of these reptilian creatures, crocodiles, etc. They were created by these fallen angels, with perhaps assistance from the sons of God men, or the sons of God men like Lucifer. They also learned, they participated in this evil, and therefore they probably learned all these genetic sciences of how to manipulate, how to mix various species to create hybrid creatures, to create monstrous creatures, to create what we call demons, okay? There are stories of these creatures everywhere in our world. They came from somewhere. They were not there in the beginning, so they have an origin, and that origin lies with these other creatures that were created by God, like these angelic races and like these sons of God men, who had great intelligence, they had great knowledge, they had great technology, and they used that to create and manufacture these creatures. So now I'm going to go back and play some more of that video that I had played in part 3 about the story of this Morgoth. Okay, this is in Tolkien's story, this high angel who first turned to evil in God's in the creation story in that work. Okay, and he is the one that began to create these monsters and these hybrid creatures and these reptilian creatures and the dragon. And from that, by comparing it, because he is so closely parallels the story of the anointed cherub in Ezekiel 28, it is obvious that Tolkien's inspiration came from the Bible. And we can understand that, Satan, the devil, has access to information about history of the past, which we do not. And he shares that in works of fiction, in fantasy fiction particularly, and in science fiction, etc. He does not give credit for everything that has happened. The credit of history, he doesn't give it to God. He tries to give it to himself, to glorify himself through these histories. So his histories are distorted. They are lying histories, yet there is certain truth in them. Like in mythology, for example, the stories of these gods like Zeus and Apollo, etc., there's a great deal of truth in them, especially stories of such mighty men like Hercules. Okay, there I've talked about that they were these mighty men about whom we read in Genesis 6:4. That, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men and they bore them children, the same became mighty men, men of renown. And the Bible clearly tells us that they were men, and they were not Nephilim or hybrids or sometimes they were men, because they were a product of two creatures who are men. The men were the celestial men, were the sons of God. The daughters were the children, the women of the earth. They were able to have relations with each other, and they produced these children. And these children, because they did have some type of special genetics from their fathers, they were mightier in the sense that they were more powerful. They also had access to more technologies. Therefore, they became very famous and renowned men of that time. And amongst them were people like Hercules, who is the most famous of them all. So I got a little sidetracked there. So let me continue with this clip from this video. And then again, I will add my commentary from time to time. And then we will establish that this is how these dragons, these serpentine creatures came into existence. That's where all of this principalities and power, not all of them, but most of them that exist in this time, they were existing here on the earth in an age past, in physical form, as corporeal creatures of flesh. They were destroyed at the end of the last stage when God sent the mightiest flood that this creation has ever seen, much greater than the flood of Noah. And they were all, not maybe not all, but at least some of them or a lot of them were killed in their body, but they have been allowed to continue as disembodied spirits to be the evil principalities and powers of this age. That's where they came from. And the chief of all of these devils is the seven-headed red dragon called the old serpent, whose name is Satan in the Bible. So let's continue now.
He racks the elves with fear, killing or capturing many in his time. Through the torture of his captives and other foul works, it is believed Melkor creates the race of orcs.
There's much that we can learn from Tolkien's story by comparing it to the creation story of the Bible. For example, that this angel, this Melkor, when he first turned to evil, it was not immediately that all these dwarves and monsters and creatures and goblins and trolls and orcs and these dragons and serpents and everything came into existence. Evil develops and grows slowly. So as it grew, even before God created the earth, and he created the men that were going to inhabit the earth, who are called the sons of God, there seems to have been some type of conflict that was already raging between this Melkor anointed cherub angel and between perhaps the other angels of God who did not turn to evil and follow him. So this Melkor, he was not alone. Neither was the anointed cherub. They all had a host. They had an army that followed them. And that just goes to show the majesty and the royalty of these angelic beings that God created, because they were so majestic and royal and powerful that even the other angels, or some of them at least, decided to follow them and to take their side. Now, in the Bible, we read about the host of heaven, which is the army of heaven. We read about the archangel, somebody like Michael, who is warring against Satan. So it is quite clear, and these angels with swords, etc., are quite clearly depicted in the Bible several times. So what it teaches us is that there is an army, like a military in heaven, which serves God. So therefore, this military also must have come into existence at some point in time. And the only purpose such a military would serve is if there was some other opposing army or an opposing host, which means that there had to be some evil creatures to oppose God's good. So therefore, even before the earth was made and these sons of God, men came to inhabit it, who also some of them turned to evil, and their evil history is later on, we read about, for example, in Isaiah 14, when we read the story of Lucifer. Long before that time, it seemed that these angelic races, the evil ones, and those who serve God, they were already warring with each other. And this is how I believe that God, He trained His angels. He formed his army, his generals, his hierarchy, his warriors, his archangels, etc., that serve him as generals in his army or as military leaders. This is when that host of heaven came into existence. This is the history of the evil and of the armies of heaven being created before even the earth had been made, and these other creatures, such as these sons of God, men and the beasts, had even come into existence. Okay, so what we read here is that this creature, Melkor, now I'm very, very sure that there is a definite order in which God created his creatures. It began with these high angels called the cherubim, and then the other races of angels. And I suppose that they were given the heaven, okay, that they were in the city of heaven, which they must have had some role in developing and building. Just like, when God made the earth and gave it to man, he said, replenish it. He says, to subdue it and to fill it and to build, worlds upon it, to build cities, to have a civilization on it, basically, okay? So God didn't come and build all the houses and all that himself. He taught man, he gave man the knowledge and the understanding to do so. And I suppose that is how it also happened up in heaven, that these heavenly beings, this is why this angel, began to think of himself as God, because he was, I'm sure, created very early on. And then he was also participant in the creation of the heaven itself, which is a massive city. It is much bigger, I believe, or at least the same size as the earth itself. So this city of heaven, itself was not built instantaneously. When God says in the beginning God created the heaven, that in itself is an age of creation in which these city was when God began this process of creation. And I believe before, like, the buildings of heaven came into existence and such things, he made these angels who were the first builders and constructors of God's creation. So my speculation that, these angelic races came into existence, the only thing which is difficult to determine is that did this angel, was his evil before the earth was made and before these sons of God men had already been made, or did it occur at some point in time afterwards, okay? Now in Tolkien's story, this Melkor angel, he turned to evil. He sowed discord even before Arda, the earth, was made. But again, like from the Bible, that is not possible to determine when exactly this angel, the anointed cherub, turned to evil. He was perfect in his beginning, as we read, until iniquity was found in him. When exactly was that iniquity? Now, I said, like it is possible that it happened before the earth was made, or it might have happened later on. It seems like that it is possible that it happened prior to that time already, even while the heaven was being built or had been built, that it was at that point in time before God started making the earth and these sons of God and the other beasts and other creatures that would come to inhabit it, that this angel had already turned to evil. So that is speculative, and it would kind of make sense that these angels who had some type of, that they had a conflict between themselves. We read about these ancient stories about these wars of the gods, etc. So these heavenly wars. So it is quite possible, but this cannot be determined without doubt from the Bible. This is, again, like I said, speculation whether this evil of this anointed cherub happened before the formation of the earth and of the sons of God men, or afterwards. But it is certain that the angels and the angelic races were the first creatures that God created, and that they also participated in the building of all creation, beginning with the city of heaven and then with the heavenly bodies. So the knowledge and the power of these creatures is truly beyond anything that we can even begin to imagine. He takes some of these other creatures that later came into existence, such as the elves, who are men, and then he began to genetically, we are told in Tolkien's story that he tortured them. And by what I understand now, in the light of the type of knowledge and science that we have in this day, we understand that what this torture is, that it is genetic experimentation, that they were butchered and their genes were mixed, and they were created all these races of giants, and this gene of gigantism, the gene of these trolls, of the dwarves, etc., goblins, all these creatures are real. They came into existence, okay, at that time. And later on, this experimentation, it went to another level where they were mixing different species all together, not just manipulating an existing species like the men, like I said, the sons of God men, the elves, and just introducing some type of giant gene into it so that they became really big in stature, or they became shorter and became dwarves, etc. No, it is that they took the genes of beasts, and having the knowledge that God had given them, as in the story of Tolkien, God himself tells Melkor that he is the mightiest of them all. In Ezekiel 28, in regards to the anointed cherub, God himself says that he was perfect in beauty and full of wisdom. So, obviously they were given a great deal of knowledge. And all the knowledge was given the knowledge and understanding and power was given to these races by God on purpose, because he knew that some of them were going to turn to evil, because power does corrupt it. When it is not directed in love, it will always lead to corruption, and therefore some of them were destined to become corrupt, and their corruption had to have an avenue in which it would be expressed, and that would be this here, the creation of these monsters, the creation of these devils, demons, etc., who come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. That is how it happened. It did not happen. Many people falsely teach that in the days of Noah, that these fallen angels came and they started having sex with women, and suddenly you not only have the giants, you suddenly have hybrids, you have this and that, all kinds of monsters suddenly come into existence. Really, if this, okay, let's grant it that the giants may have been a product of this here, but where did all the other creatures come from? These angels, they suddenly they become beasts. We can understand that an angel is somewhat like in form similar to a man, that if we were to believe that story, which is a completely false one, the sons of God are not fallen angels. But even if we granted that they were, and they were able to have sex with these women, and they produced these mighty men, and they tell us that they were the Nephilim, which they were not, but so which means they were big giant people. Okay, fine. Then where did all the other monsters come from? You know what I mean? These stories make no sense. But if you go back, that there is a prehistory, there's a history of evil, there's a history of creation that goes much further back than Adam, that it was in those times, going right back, even before even the beasts and all these other men existed, there was, this creature he was perfecting warfare. He was fighting wars with God's angels, and God was using, he was training his own angels to become warriors, because he was going to have these armies, and they were being trained, and they had these wars up in the heavens and later on the earth. And it was later that when God made the earth, and then he gave it to the men, the sons of God, to inhabit it and to create worlds upon it. That some of those creatures, they turned to evil, and those are the ones, from which, as we read in this story, in this video, we are told that the orcs were actually elves, or these sons of God men in the beginning, but then through genetic experimentation or genetic manipulation, or some type of genetic corruption, that they were transformed into these monstrous creatures like the orcs and the goblins and the trolls and these giants that did not exist in the beginning of creation.
The Valar come to Middle-earth in the year of the trees 1090 to do battle with Melkor. This massive War of the Gods begins with an army of the West confronting Melkor's forces in the northwest of Middle-earth. The entire region is ruined by the battle.
So in this story here, in Tolkien's story, an army of angels goes to make war with these evil angels. And, we can read something like along those lines, that these heavenly wars, at least they will happen in the future, and I'm sure they've happened in the past as well. For example, in Revelation chapter 12, we can read about in verse 7, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. and prevail not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So these wars of the gods, so called, these are very much a part of the history of creation. We can speculate about them. We can't have the exact details about them until later in, once this age is past and the fullness of knowledge comes. Until then, we can only speculate. But what is not speculation is that these wars and this history is real. It has happened. It has wrought destruction, not just upon the earth, but even up in the heavenly realms. Creation has seen much catastrophic destruction in the past. Of that much is certain, and none greater than we see in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, where all of creation is in a state of a ruined wasteland, or pretty much all of it, including and up to the heavens themselves, which there is no light. Darkness has engulfed it, because it was necessary for full darkness to come in God's creation, so God could say, "Let there be light," so the fullness of his light could be revealed against the background of that darkness that came because of the evil that arose in God's creation, first through these angels, then through the sons of God, men, and finally through these dragon, serpent, beasts, and these hybrids, abominable demons and monsters that arose in creation, about which let's continue to study by understanding that in Tolkien's story, it was this Melkor who created the dragon in the first place, who later, of course, in the Bible becomes Satan. And in Tolkien stories, there were many dragons. Some of them were very prominent, and that, I'm sure, is the same case with the Bible as well, that, there isn't only one Satan dragon. There are many principalities, many lords, many, high devils, so to speak, high dragons. It is that the chief of them is called Satan, as there was a chief one in Tolkien's story who was named Glaurung, who was the very first dragon that this angel Melkor created.
In the aftermath of this long war, Middle-earth is changed. New mountain ranges are raised up, the Great Sea becomes larger, and new lands and waterways take shape.
So this description of catastrophic destruction, a reshaping of the earth in Tolkien's story, again closely parallels many passages in the Bible, which talks about a time when the earth itself has suffered real catastrophic destruction, literal melting, as a matter of fact, about evidence of which is seen across the world even to this very days. Even the deserts, etc., are supposed to have come into existence because of this high heat, intense melting heat that has been applied to the earth in the past, which was the result of these wars and of God's judgment upon it. So this next clip pertains particularly to the creation and the origin of dragons in Tolkien's story, The Silmarillion.
Many fierce creatures inhabited the world of Arda, each with their own unique characteristics, and one such creature was a master of fire and destruction, matched only by its capacity for evil and cunning. Dragons. These creatures of Morgoth were among his most fearsome servants, and they played a part in some of the most significant events in Middle-earth's history. How did these dragons come to be? And could they perhaps have a stronger link to Morgoth than we first thought? Hello friends, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be exploring the origins of the fearsome dragons. So there is no doubt that dragons originated through Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. However, in the world of Arda, only one being could create life, and that was Eru Iluvatar, the god of Middle-earth. This leads to the question, how did Morgoth create dragons if he was unable to create life?
So the question of how can a creature create life, it is only the creator that has the power to do so, is actually a good question. And I have speculated on this in the past, that, in the case of the angel, for example, creating other life forms or corrupting living beings is certainly possible given the level of knowledge and understanding and the power that has been given to the creature by the creator. The question is one of consciousness and of conscience. It is like, a machine in a sense is a living, it's animated, it lives, it operates, it functions, therefore even a machine can be living. So if a machine can be downloaded, like into a computer, for example, a consciousness can be downloaded, and that's in a sense is what artificial intelligence is. That somebody from the outsource, like a person who's doing a programming, is programming a computer to perform certain functions and to process information in a certain way. So that is definitely a possibility in the case of something like the dragon or Satan. Creating the bodily part is not difficult. That is made like God made man from the dust of the ground. So, given the knowledge and understanding, like an angel, they could take the dust of the existing materials in God's creation and form a body or a shape out of it. The question is of animating. Animating is just, powering it. And therefore, what is the power source of the dragon? We don't really know, what powers them or what powered them in the past, how they were sort of alive, but living is to power machines. You can put gasoline into them and it powers them. So I'm sure these creatures who had been with God since the beginning, they knew how these processes of life work, and therefore they were able to animate them. The real question is one of consciousness and of understanding and of the spirit of the person, the heart of the person. And in that respect, I believe it is the anointed cherub that lives on in Satan, that it is his evil that was downloaded into this creature. How it was done, I don't know. And this, I think, also applies to Lucifer and those sons of God men that followed these fallen angels. They worshiped them as gods, and they learned from them that they too had their evil knowledge and understanding downloaded into them. And since they had been given this artificial intelligence to be able to process this information, they too became evil like their evil creator, who is the anointed cherub in the case of Satan, and this Melkor in the case of the dragon. Because it is apparent in Tolkien's story that this dragon, especially the first one, Glaurung, he was purely evil, just like his maker Melkor or Morgoth. And same with Satan. He is evil because his maker, his creator, who had already become evil by that time, took his own evil and he put it into this creature, the dragon called Satan. And what Satan received was only evil. Nothing good was put into him. That is why he was created as a murderous machine, and that's what he did right from his beginning. That's why Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning, because that is the knowledge, the understanding, the consciousness, the conscience of evil was downloaded into him, copied and downloading. God copies his own conscience, his own mind, his own heart, and he writes it upon our own. So I think this knowledge, this understanding also was possessed by these angels, and they were able to program these creatures, the devil and Satan, in a way that, they would be purely evil, designed as killing, murderous machines. Again, the Bible teaches, that a mind can be copied from one person to another, just like, taking a hard drive and making a copy of it. And this is what we read about in 1 Corinthians 2:16, for example, that we have the mind of Christ. And that is not just something that is metaphoric or metaphorical. It means that it is a reality, that the mind we have, the information, mind is, what is a mind? A mind is a storehouse of information that it processes. So it's a processor as well as a store. And therefore, this mind is that, God is taking the information, his own mind, and he's putting that information into ours and removing everything that we have learned as a man out of it. And then we begin to process information the way Christ or God does, right? That is the copying of a mind. And we can read that again in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16. I did a whole study in the book of Hebrews about, how God is copying his image. That is, he is transforming us into himself by copying his knowledge, his understanding, his love, his heart into our own. And this is what is written here. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. Okay? So, if this can be done in man's mind. What do? Do we not program our children's mind? Does a teacher not program a student's minds? That's what they do. They put information into it, and that's how mind gets programmed. Mind is representative of a consciousness. That's what it is. So one's consciousness can be copied and downloaded into another person. That is both, we can understand it today, especially in the light of our understanding of computer technologies, but even from the Bible we can. So this is also true. What is true of man and God is also true of these angels and these creatures that they created. The anointed cherub and his fallen angels, they could teach what they had learned, their own evil, they could copy onto another creature. In this case, the dragon, the serpentine dragons. Okay, so the anointed cherub and his fallen angels, what they did was that the evil mind that they had was copied onto the mind of Satan and the other dragons and serpents that they created. And therefore, in that respect, the anointed cherub, who's the head of the angels, he is locked away in the depths of hell, we are told in the book of Second Peter and in the book of Jude. But that does not mean that he does not live on in this time. He is still existent in the Satan, the devil, who is operational in our world, because all that evil that this angel had created and he had become was copied and downloaded onto Satan. Consciousness is programming of the operating system of man's heart, of man, and of God is the heart. That is, how does the information and knowledge that a person has, how is it used? That's how is it operated. Is it operated for good or for evil? In the case of God, he knows everything. He even understands evil perfectly. But he never operates in an evil manner, that he never uses his power, his knowledge, his understanding for evil purposes, okay? Same thing in the case of man. Man's conscience, it operates him according to whether he is motivated by good or by evil. In the case of this anointed cherub angel, Melkor, the anointed cherub, he had already become completely evil. Therefore, he could only function in an evil way. And therefore, everything that he created, he programmed them in a similar manner. How it was done, I don't know. I don't have that type of knowledge or, the science to be able to do that, but he did. And that's what he did with the serpent dragon. He downloaded his own information and knowledge into his mind. It's like artificial intelligence. And then his own heart, he programmed him so that he could only operate in an evil manner. And that is why the Satan, the dragon, was created as a weapon, as a machine to destroy, and it could only operate in an evil manner as a murderer and a sinner right from his very beginning. Otherwise, there is no explanation that I have found that would teach us that, how could God create something that was evil right from its beginning? He can't. He purposed for evil to exist, but the creatures he created, they were not evil in the beginning. They later on turned to evil just as he planned, but it wasn't he who made them evil. But in the case of Satan, he was already evil. This is how it happened, okay? So this is true of Melkor and Glaurung, the first dragon that he created. This dragon was already programmed to do evil, as we shall see in the story.
So the answer to this is that he transformed and corrupted other creatures to form dragons. And this is backed up by quite a few quotes from Tolkien's works. In the Silmarillion, we're told that under Morgoth, beasts became monsters of horn and ivory that dyed the earth with blood. And in the letters of Tolkien, he says the following about orcs, but it also applies to dragons. But since they are servants of the dark power, and later of Sauron, neither of whom could or would produce living things, they must be corruptions. Now since we've established that they were corruptions, the next question, and more difficult one, is what type of creature were they initially? And the best we can do is speculate on this, based on the dragon's natural characteristics. So considering their reptilian nature, their scaly skin, their snake-like lidless eyes, and their soft unprotected chest, they're very similar to reptiles such as snakes, lizards, or even salamanders. This is further encouraged by the fact that the first dragons did not have wings, making them more similar to these creatures. And yet, through all of this, another mystery arises. How did Morgoth manage to transform these creatures into fearsome dragons from such humble origins? It seems quite drastic, going from a powerless reptile to a creature capable of tremendous destruction, though there is an explanation for this. For Morgoth distributed part of his power, his very being, into his creatures, and through this, he empowered them significantly, though it also weakened Morgoth.
So the question how the dragon, beasts, or any other kind of creature is powered is really not difficult, because in our world, for example, I would speculate that these dragons in particular, they are more mechanical than they are like flesh and blood in that normal sense we think of as beasts, okay? And being mechanical because, they breathe fire, etc. So it seems like, at least from a mythological perspective, that they had some type of power generating capacity within them, okay? And this, you can see like we have these huge ships that sail the seas, there are big planes that fly, all types of railway cars, etc. They're all powered because there is some type of fuel that goes into them. So the size itself is not really that important because the size depends on the ability to manufacture something of that size, and then secondly to be able to fuel it so that it becomes operational. So these angels, they were themselves in many ways, the machines that they could create would be so fantastic that we can't even begin to imagine them. And that is how I visualize this Satan, at one point in time. They are organic machinery and they had some type of real, apparatus in them, which is different than what a normal animal on this earth or man does. The breath that powers us is the life source that comes from God. In the case of these creatures, was it something else? Who knows? We don't really know. But that question that they were very big and fierce. And in the case of the dragon, the red dragon of the Bible, he truly is gigantic. Because we are told that, his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. So, the size is so gigantic that I can't even begin to imagine how big it must be. Even in the case of Leviathan that, we read about in Job, it is God himself describes this creature as being like fantastically big. Yet they are powered, yet they live, yet they function. So, we don't have to go into those type of exact details as to what they are constituted of, what is their body made out of, what is it that operates them. What really matters is the consciousness and the conscience that is in them, okay, which is evil, because it stems from the father of evil, from Morgoth, the anointed cherub himself, who was the first father of evil in God's creation. His evil was not just passed on to these dragons, but I also believe to these sons of God, men like Lucifer. They were partners, you could say, in crime, and Lucifer was protege. I'm sure he was a protege of these anointed cherubs and these fallen angels, and they gained much knowledge and understanding from these creatures themselves. And later on, I'm sure they themselves engaged in such genetic manipulation and experimentation, and they further this work that was first begun by these angels in creating many abominable hybrid creatures and other evil creatures, the count of which are totally beyond even counting. That's how many, which goes to show you how old the history of creation is, how long they were operating in this, and why God allowed it to continue for so long is that every facet of evil had to be expressed so that every facet of God's good could also be revealed by comparing it to that particular facet of evil.
We're told that this was because, as he grew in malice, he sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness. His power passed into them and was dispersed.
So this idea of a creature creating another in his own image, or any creator creating someone in his own image, is also very biblical. Because in Genesis 1:26, for example, we can read where God said, "Let us make man in our image." And any creator, he can only endow his creation with part of himself, right? He doesn't, something that doesn't exist inside of him cannot be imparted to his creation. And that is exactly what happened with this Melkor and his evil creatures that he created. He poured his own malice and his own evil into them, making them in his own image of evil. And that is exactly applies to the anointed cherub as well, that as he grew in malice and evil, and that is another doctrine, that evil doesn't spring up full grown overnight. And in an instant, it needs time to mature and grow. And that is what happened. One day iniquity was found in him, but that doesn't mean that he became perfected in evil and darkness that very day. It developed and grew over a period of ages, as a matter of fact, I would say. So in those ages, as his evil grew perfected, it was downloaded, it was passed on, it was imaged in his own creatures that he was manipulating and corrupting. And that, my dear friends, is also something that we learn from the Bible, that this is what God does with us. He programs us with his good, whereas anyone that is a creator of evil will program his own creations with his own evil.
And yet, I think all of this has a much darker meaning than Morgoth simply giving some of his strength to his creatures, because there's a lot of evidence that suggests that Morgoth might have in fact been infusing them with his very spirit. In the letters of Tolkien, letter 212, Tolkien says the following about Aule, and this can also be applied to Morgoth. But he could not give independent life to his makings. He had only one life, his own derived from the One, and could at most only distribute it. Now Glaurung, the father of dragons, was said to have an evil spirit inside him that would at times speak through him. Even his eyes were said to be terrible, being filled with the fell spirit of Morgoth, his master, and on one occasion we're even told that there came from him the laughter of Morgoth, dim but horrible, as an echo of malice out of the black depths far away.
So here we can also learn something which is very, very significant. That just as in creation there is only one creator, okay, who is God, who alone is good. The opposite is also true, that really, in reality, there's only one father of evil who was truly evil in God's creation, and that is the anointed cherub. So just as this angel in Tolkien's story, Melkor or Morgoth, he poured his own spirit into this dragon, Glaurung, who was the first dragon that he created. This is exactly, I believe, also true of this creature we call Satan, leaving aside his body, what he looks like, whether he's a dragon or a serpent with 6 heads or 7 heads or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not the outward appearance that matters or his size. What matters is the spirit that is inside of him. And in that respect, the spirit of evil that is in him is the spirit of the anointed cherub. So there is Satan, you could say, is still that evil angel. So in that respect, when people talk about fallen angels, metaphorically, it is true that, they are still around, because the father of these fallen angels, the anointed cherub, still lives on in Satan. And that spirit, as in Tolkien's story, it was coming forth out of this creature, the Glaurung dragon, that, he spoke with the angel's voice. His eyes were full of that malice and evil of the angel. It is also true of Satan. He operates in the spirit of that angel. So who is Satan? You could say that Satan is the father of evil through his creator, his father, who is the angel, the anointed cherub.
After this laugh, a cold, low voice spoke out from the dragon, which I believe could very well be Morgoth's spirit. I wonder if perhaps some of the dragon's powers and characteristics were influenced or even derived from Morgoth's spirit, and there's a quote which suggests that this might be the case. For Turin says that he knows something about Glaurung, that his power is rather in the evil spirit that dwells within him than in the might of his body, great though that be.
This is actually a very good observation, that in the case of this dragon, Glaurung, it was not the size of the body that gave him his strength. It was this evil spirit that dwelt within him. And this is also true of Satan the dragon, okay? Like I spoke earlier about that, the dimensions of his bodily size might truly have been very incredible, but that again is not what gives him his power. It is the power of the evil that dwells in him, and that evil is the evil of the anointed cherub, who you could say is his father, is his creator. So that evil which first dwelt in this anointed cherub, in this Melkor Morgoth angel of Tolkien, who is, they are same in the Bible as the anointed cherub that first dwelt in him, whom iniquity was first found in God's creation. The same evil has been now transferred, or it has been copied into Satan, and that in that sense, you could even say that Satan himself is this anointed cherub. At least in many aspects, he cannot ever completely be what that angel was, because we can't even begin to fathom what he must have been like. But that evil, what he turned into later, as he matured and grew in his evil, that evil part of him was later downloaded, it was copied, it was imaged in Satan. Therefore, Satan is a perfect copy of this first father of evil. It is his evil's copy, his evil that still lives on in the dragon, in Satan, which gives him his power. It is the power of darkness, but he is not the originator of that darkness. That darkness and that evil first originated in his creator, the anointed cherub.
Now, before we compare some of Morgoth's powers and characteristics with those of dragons, I'd like to emphasize that, despite the evidence we'll be discussing, this is simply my own speculation based on research. So both Morgoth and dragons are known to manipulate and trick others through lies and deceit, and in The Hobbit it's even called Dragonspell. Morgoth does so on many occasions, such as when he incited the Noldor to rebel against the Valar, and both Glaurung and Smaug used this Dragonspell several times. For example, when Smaug tries to manipulate Bilbo to turn him against his dwarven companions, and he almost succeeds, as we're told that Bilbo was in grievous danger of coming under the Dragonspell.
There can be no doubt, at least from a biblical perspective, that the devil, the dragon, the serpent, Satan, he is a liar and a deceiver. But that again does not mean that he originated lies and deceits in God's creation. That began, of course, with the anointed cherub. Now, as I told you, there are three princes of evil: the anointed cherub, Lucifer, the man, and Satan, the beast. And I'm leaving kind of Lucifer out of this here because I think what applies to Satan also applies a great deal to Lucifer. That his evil was also copied, downloaded, imaged from the anointed cherub. That being his student, he learned his evil and his craft from these fallen angels. So in that respect, neither Lucifer or Satan are the original creators of evil. They just are students of evil, you could say, that they have learned from the master and they have continued their craft that they learned from these angels of evil that first rebelled and sinned against God in creation. And therefore, this story about both the angels and this dragons, using what's called dragon spell, or keeping people spellbound, as we read in 2 Corinthians 4:4, in whom that, if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them that believe not. So, yes, so they are kept spellbound. People are kept spellbound. There's this veil of darkness that is cast over their mind, so that the light of God's truth cannot penetrate into them. And this, however, did not start with Satan. It started with this anointed cherub angel. He's the first one that set himself up as God. He is the first one that wanted to go and overthrow God and take his throne. He is the first one that took this army of angels with him to do war against God. Okay? So therefore, he is the first creator of lies, of deceit, of idolatry, idolatrous worship, which I've talked about when we studied the history of the anointed cherub and of the creation of money and all manners of evil in God's creation. They can be originated back to him. In this age, as we have talked about, for example, also at the time of the anointed cherub, we were talking about money, that I had mentioned that these dragons, Satan, he is like a merchant banker. He loves money. But again, that love of money comes to him from his father, the anointed cherub, who created money. So what I'm getting at here is that everything that Satan is in this time, leaving aside his physical appearance, which it used to be, whatever he is now as an evil, he's a disembodied spirit. One time he was a creature that had a body, okay, and I do not believe he does so any longer. But regardless, it is not his shape or his figure or his bodily appearance or his outward appearance that matters, is what's inside him, the person that he is on the inside. In the case of Jesus Christ, we are told in Hebrews chapter 1 that he is the express image of God's person, which means he is an exact duplicate of the person of God, of God's character, of God's inner being. This same truth applies to Satan, that he is the express image of his father, the anointed cherub, who is the father of evil. So who is Satan? You could say Satan is this fallen angel, this anointed cherub, the evil part of him. That is who Satan is. Satan is not the originator of evil. He is merely one in whom this evil was downloaded, and he has acted upon that evil all from his beginning, being a murderer right from the time that he began.
We also see both Morgoth and dragons controlling or influencing others with the power of their eyes. The moment Turin looked into Glaurung's eyes, we're told that straight away he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and Turin was unable to move. Through his eyes, Glaurung then cast a spell that warped Turin's thoughts and perspective and influenced his actions. Morgoth also used his eyes to control others, as he commanded his orcs to keep elf prisoners alive and bring them to him. And then, through the terror of his eyes, they would walk in fear of him doing his bidding, despite having no chains on them. We also know that the Noldor elves were afraid of their kin that had been slaves in Angband, for Morgoth would pretend to free them, though their will would still be chained to his, and they would always come back to him. To me, this sounds very much like a more powerful version of the spell Glaurung had cast. And several times throughout the books, there's emphasis on Morgoth's gaze, such as when he tried to daunt Lúthien with his eyes, or when Húrin was freed by Morgoth and returned to Doriath. And Melian, the queen of Doriath, told him that Morgoth had bewitched him, and she says, "For he that seeth through Morgoth's eyes, willing or unwilling, seeth all things crooked." They also share other similarities, such as their lust for treasure and riches, their pride, cunning, and their vanity.
And again, in the part 1 and 2 of this series on Satan, I had done a study on the Nagas, which are prominently found in India, but also in other parts, eastern parts of the world for sure. But the serpent people, serpent worship, etc., is something that is common across the world. But one of the aspects of these Nagas was that they had a very powerful gaze, which could literally hold somebody spellbound, in a captive, hold somebody captive just through their look. And this you see in movies as well, in a lot of these cartoon movies, even for kids and for children, you see these flames coming out of people's eyes. Even Superman, he has these laser beams that come out of his eyes and such things that have great power. All these have some type of reality. That the gaze itself, there could be some sort of technology. In the case of the anointed cherub, when I did a study in the anointed cherub, it was clear that he had, with the tablets and pipes that were prepared in him, his jewels and such things that were set in him, that he seemed like a very technological creature. Okay, and therefore there's some type of technology that works through the eyes, and it really has some type of power that is projected onto people, and then it works on their mind in blinding them. when the Bible tells us, 2 Corinthians 4:4, that Satan blinds the minds of them that believe not. Well, there has to be some type of mechanism that or technology that is used to make that happen. And that, my friends, again, is this video that I will link in the description, is very well put together, because it tells us a lot of characteristics of this dragon that was created by this angel Morgoth. And basically what he's teaching us here is that these dragons are essentially nothing more than a copy or the spirit of their creator. And that, I believe, is absolutely applicable to the reality of Satan, that he is the spirit. He operates in the spirit, the evil spirit of the anointed cherub. And as such, you could say, at least figuratively, that Satan is the anointed cherub. Not the majestic royal creature when the anointed cherub was first created as a high priest and a majestic governor of God's creation. No, not that one. But once he had turned to evil, once iniquity had been found in him, and that it's the evil part of him that is the creature called Satan. So, many people teach that Satan was an angel in heaven, which he was not. He was always created as this dragon beast by this angel who was in heaven. But figuratively speaking, you could say that there is some truth in that he is the fallen angel, that this is the final version of that evil that was first found in that anointed cherub on that day so long ago, in so many ages past that have already gone by, when that was first found in him. Evil and sin and iniquity was first found in him. The final form, the final version, the final end of that is this dragon serpent Satan. And therefore, because Satan is a copy, you could say, of this evil anointed cherub, he will also participate in the judgment of that angel. Therefore, this evil that was first found in him has found its final end in this dragon serpent. That is the story of Satan. He was created as a dragon beast, as a weapon, as an instrument that this anointed cherub was going to use in his wars against the other angels, in his wars with the sons of God men. There was wars against so many different groups and factions, the host of heaven, and these evil angels, between the sons of God men, between the beasts like the dragons, etc., that we can't even begin to understand the history of all that has gone on in the past. We can just take a look from it through this glass darkly and gain a picture that this history did occur, in which evil was born, and then it grew to be this absolute darkness. It was born in the anointed cherub. It became absolute darkness in Satan. And that absolute darkness will be cast into the lake of fire in the end. That is the end of evil that began so long ago. As I conclude this series on the history of creation, with special emphasis on the history of evil in the Bible, and we finish off with the history of Satan, having covered the history of the first two fathers of evil, or the first two chief princes of evil, the anointed cherub and Lucifer, in the past videos in this series. I want to draw your attention to one of the very common occult symbols in our world, which is called the Ouroboros. It is the symbol of a serpent which is devouring its own tail. What this symbol tells us is that evil in the end will devour itself. And that is the story of the anointed cherub and the dragon and Lucifer and all these evil creatures that once were partners. Like I said, this anointed cherub created the dragon. But I believe it was this very dragon, these very beasts that God used in the ages past, first of all, to defeat and to destroy these angels and to cast them down to hell. And they were also used to destroy Lucifer and his army that was attempting to ascend up into heaven, like you might see in a Star Wars movie, to go and to sit in the Mount of Congregation in the north to be like the Most High God, which of course is an attempt in which he failed miserably. He got nowhere close to heaven, the throne of God. He was cast down from the atmosphere above us, which is the heaven from which he fell. He didn't fall from the heaven of God because he was never there. He was on the earth. Okay, but these are the creatures that God, these evil creatures themselves created, that in the end devoured them. And that is going to be the fate of Satan as well. that in the end his own evil is going to, which of course he inherited from his father, the anointed cherub, and from Lucifer. It is that very evil that is going to destroy him. Evil is a fire, like the burning phoenix bird. It is a fire that consumes, as you know, God told the anointed cherub that I will bring a fire out from the midst of you, and it is going to burn you. It is going to burn you to ashes. And that is exactly what happens. That is what we learn. See, all these symbols, all these, these stories, these myths, these legends, they have some reality, they have some basis, they have a foundation in some truth. And if we can understand a Bible, what the Bible is teaching, then we can arrive at some real history of the past. And this, my friends, is the history of Satan as I have understood it. I have found these teachings, this story, especially in the history of creation and especially the story of evil in this book by J.R.R. Tolkien, it has helped me gain a better understanding of what happened in reality in the past, the story of the fallen angels, of these sons of God, men who are called elves in Tolkien's writings, and then of the dragons and of the other monsters that are found throughout Tolkien's works and throughout fantasy fiction and throughout mythologies and various myths and legends of various cultures. So I will conclude here with the teaching about opposites in the Bible. God is absolutely good, okay? He has not even a grain of evil in him. And it was not until absolute evil arose, until evil became absolute in God's creation, that an exact opposite of God would exist. By comparing to whom, when we compared God, we can understand his light as opposed to this absolute darkness. And that creature in whom evil became absolute is Satan. It did not become absolute in the anointed cherub, neither in Lucifer. That is why there were three chief princes of evil. The first one was the originator of evil, the creator of evil, the birther of evil, and then it was passed on to Lucifer and finally on to Satan. And it is in Satan that this darkness which covered God's creation in Genesis 1-2 was the absolute darkness which God needed so that God could say, let there be light. And then the light of God, which means the knowledge of God, could begin to be understood by us, that God is ultimately the knowledge that God is love. Without evil existing, an absolute evil existing, we could never have had an understanding of the love of God, which is measured against the ultimate measure of evil, which is death. In the end, evil ends in death, and it is by overcoming the evil of death, that God proved his absolute love for his creation, especially for man. That is why these creatures had to exist, evil had to exist. It was born in the anointed cherub, it matured and grew in Lucifer, and finally it became absolute in Satan. The meaning of the word Satan is opposer, or one who stands in opposition. So he is the opposite of God. Okay? And that again, he is the darkness to God's light. He is the evil to God's good. He is the death to God's life. Again, these doctrines and these teachings I have covered in detail in many of my past videos, and I pray that you will go and listen to all of them and take the time to study the information, because it is indeed the deep truths of the Word of God, and it is fantastic when we understand this real history of the past, which is much more, even from an entertainment perspective, it is much more entertaining than any Lord of the Rings books or movies or anything that Hollywood can come up with. Thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.
Closely to the words we share. Our Lord Jesus wants to take you there. choice before you. Your own will or Jesus' plan. Do your choosing, please don't hesitate. Eternity lies in the choice you made. Two roads from which to choose, road to glory or the fool's highway. Two roads from which to choose, the rocky one or the Lord's new freeway. Choose before the Savior comes, the road to glory or the rocky one. Please decide before the Lord descends. Sweet road to glory or the bitter choice you